So, like a number of families every summer, our family found ourselves at the shores of the beach for a few days, just to get away a little bit. And this particular trip was kind of a turning point because I had been trying for years to get any of my children to go into the surf a little bit. I think that we found ourselves at the beach a lot of times around Shark Week, and so they just were so scared about anything that could be under the surface that they couldn't see, almost to the point of being paralyzed on the sand while I found myself in the waves. But this year, 2 out of the 3 came out, and so my middle son particularly enjoyed it. It was a day with pretty big crashing waves, as much as Alabama can get, and we found ourselves floating on a raft and just having a really nice time kind of chasing and floating as best we could. And there was one moment where I decided to see what would happen if I just kind of slipped off the raft a little bit and let him kind of go on his own. And so I got off and began to just kind of almost let my hand fall away, and he caught it in a death grip. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you're fine. You're all floating up on top of the water. Everything's safe. You're all good." And he's like, "But I won't have any connection to the ground. I need you to be able to keep me still exactly where we are." And so I smirked a little bit, got back on the float with him, and that's the way we went for the rest of the day. But I decided to try again the next day when the waves were a little calmer. And we were floating, and I got off a little bit more quickly and just kind of let him go. And when he started to protest and say his little words of, "No, no, 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 no," all of a sudden he started to enjoy it a little bit. He went around in the rhythm of the waves in a way like they were calming him, like they were familiar somehow, as a home maybe he even knew before he was born. He began to even float away a little bit, kind of as the ocean tends to pull us left. And as he floated away slowly, I could still see him clear as day. He was staying in the flow of those waters that had been there in some shape or form since the very beginning of time. The current of an ocean or a river, or even the very slight current in a bayou that seems to stand still, goes whether we bid it to or not. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that current is always moving, no matter what the eye can see. There is this sense of feeling that is almost a sixth sense behind what is apparent at the surface. And in the same way, God is always moving too. God never lets us exactly stand and stay in place. It is the same water, let's say a river that's, just a hop, skip, and a jump from us. It's the same water, and yet it is different because of the flow of where it's been. Donald Miller, who was a pastor previously, and now he's a famous speaker and writer, he says that we see this kind of movement, whether apparent or underneath the surface, all over creation. And we see it especially in the way that we ourselves are made. Did you know, maybe the science buffs in here know this already, but this is a learning I had years ago that I continue to hold on to. It's just a place of awe and wonder. Did you know that every 28 days we get completely new skin, at least to the eye? And every 9 years, our body is completely renewed with the processes of cleaning and remaking. Our body, in this relentless dying and being born again, even in that cycle, our body continues to be you, and I continue to be me, and strand by strand, flake by flake, atom by atom, there continues to be this change and movement while also remaining at our essence the same. We are not who we were when we began. I'm going to say this again. We are not who we were when we began. Whether we want to say that we have been kind of the same or unchanged, really, at least over the course of our adult lives, if you really look deep down, there are even minute shifts and changes that have happened within and all around. We have been molded and refreshed and revived and changed. And if we stay in the flow of what God is doing, we can't help but revel in the fact that the unknown is where God lives. And we know that we can face the future joyfully and unafraid because of this graceful flow that continues to carry us. So some of you know that I don't watch too much TV. I try to pick just a few, couple, 3 shows to really commit to, and then that's what I do. And for the past 3 years or so, one of those shows, you may have heard me talk about it in the hallway and whatnot, has been Ted Lasso. Anybody Ted Lasso fans? A few? Yeah, we got a few. Okay. So some of you, it's hard to remember all of the scenes, right? Although there's so many that just hit you and stay with you. But one of them was when they were out on the field and Sam, one of the most perfect players in the sense of being kind and well-liked and a genuinely good person, Sam makes a mistake on the pitch that actually results in the other team, or at least this other set of scrimmagers, getting a goal. And he beats himself up about it. The other guy who was against him kind of razzed him about it a little bit, which just made him even more incensed at the situation and at himself. And Lasso, he calls the player over to the sideline to chat with him for a second. And so Ted Lasso says, "Sam, what's the happiest animal in the world?" And Sam puzzled and said, "I have no idea," wondering why in the world he was talking about this in the first place. And then Coach Lasso replies very succinctly, "A goldfish. Do you know why the goldfish is the happiest animal on earth?" And again, Sam has no clue. And he said, "It's got a 10-second memory." Think about that for a minute. 10-second memory. And he says one more thing before sending Sam back on the pitch to do what he does best. He said, "Be a goldfish." And when I heard this, I knew that it was somewhat about just getting back up and doing the thing again that you knew you were meant to do. But it's not just about forgetting. It's about allowing yourself in every way, shape, or form to begin again, no matter what you have done, no matter what life has thrown you, no matter what you perhaps maybe have stumbled or tripped up on in your living. God always offers the opportunity to be in the flow, to become a goldfish with grace for yourself and for others, and begin again right where you are. So the work of grace, we've been talking about different ways that grace shows up. We talked 2 weeks ago about how there's a prevenient grace that kind of paves the way, rolls out the red carpet for us so that we have a way made in the name of God to discover who we are in God's image. And then there's a justifying grace that helps us to actually turn and realize our need for God and begin to point our attention and direction toward more sacred things that can bring us life. And then today we're talking about the work of grace that really shapes us into the likeness of Christ, not just before we are born, not just in one particular moment where we need it, but in the whole of our life. Every one of our days. This is the grace that is really the revelation, the sign of God's love in the world. And it's the chief aim of God's plan for ultimately saving us, remolding, remaking us, to restore the love of God inside of us so that we might reflect God's love into the world with whomever we meet. John Wesley might be a kind of an unknown entity to you, but he's one of the ones that has helped us, as at least the United Methodist Church, hone in on who we believe God to be and what we teach and preach from this pulpit that makes us different than other expressions of Christianity around the world. And Wesley stated, "This great gift of God, the saving of our souls over the long haul, is no other than the image of God fresh stamped on our hearts. It is the renewal of believers in the spirit of their minds after the likeness of God that created them." Wesley believed, too, that it was only by grace through faith. That might sound familiar from the scripture that Johnny read. Only by grace through faith that any of us as human beings can be restored into right relationship with God and with each other again and again and again. The single most harmful obstacle to spiritual growth, in Christianity at least, is a misunderstanding of this grace, or assuming that it is a grace that is hard to find and is dependent upon what we do. It keeps us out of a daily life of trust and practice with God. Dallas Willard, when he wrote his book, Renovation of the Heart, said simply this about this sanctifying grace we're exploring a little this morning. He said, basically, sanctification is a way of living in relationship to the Master that brings and sustains right thoughts, feelings, choices, and habits, enabling one to do what is good and true and beautiful and right. The most important thing to understand here is that it's a grace for our whole lives and not just for one part of our lives. It is a grace that provides the overflow for us to be able to choose what is a good and right feeling, choice, or habit. It doesn't come from our own will or desire or strength or conjuring. Grace is God acting in your life and in my life to accomplish what one cannot will or do on one's own. Grace is not opposed to effort. There's a sense where the works that we talk about, the good deeds, rise out of a life with God simply because we are grateful. But grace is not opposed to effort. That's a natural outgrowth of this grace, but it is opposed to earning. And we don't have to earn a lick of it. At the beginning, the middle, or the end of our lives, that rule never changes. One only has to study grace by experiencing it first, and then look and see the ways that grace is made real and that belief becomes alive in the very works and everyday living of our life. So this past week, there were a number of us that are staff or church members who had the gift of being able to go to an orientation event at LSU. And most of them were new students, and I don't know about y'all, churches are the weird thing on campus, right? We're kind of relegated to Free Speech Alley a lot of the time, which I think is appropriate in a lot of ways. But we had this chance to be in the Union Ballroom with so many other groups that were trying to resource people and give them pathways for the things that they needed. And we probably encountered about 100 to 120 students, and many of those we were able to have deep and substantive conversation with. One of the people that I remember clearly is a person who told me the story without even having to pull it out of them. It was a story about how LSU is really a new chapter for them. That their parents years ago kind of pushed them aside and recused their relationship with them. He went to boarding school the last 2 years of his life. And he talked about how he was really looking in every new start and every place that he had literally for family because he had little left. And it was just such a blessing to be able to hear this sibling's story, to be able to say that we have a place for them. And looking around, there was a sea of people flowing into conversation in and out of our lives just in that 1 hour that I have no doubt have their own stories to tell. However stark and dramatic or seemingly ordinary they may be, each one of us faces these threshold moments where we have to continue to look and commit to living life that is really life and not doing it alone. Just waiting to be known, these students were. Just waiting to be known, we are, friends, even in this place. And waiting to be known as we truly are. So what's God up to at this moment? In general and in you. I want you to ask yourself, in what ways have you been maybe looking at the former things and those former things of your way of being or your situation in life, keeping you open or remaining with a lack of openness to the new that's coming right into your vision? In what ways might you be able to roll a little bit more freely into the flow of what God is doing, letting go of the edge of wherever you're swimming and allowing yourself to even lift your feet from the ground to simply be carried? There was a practice that we gave you this week of actually looking at that reality and seeing who you might genuinely invite into that reality too, so they felt perhaps companioned in a place where they've been asking some of the same questions about who am I, where am I going, and where do I belong? So I pray today and in the days to come that you and I, all of us, that will stay in the flow. And who knows, the people our hearts will touch, our actions will touch, that God has already begun preparing to be right here. Who knows the lives that we will change? I pray that you and I will wake up every morning seeking and looking for the new things that God is doing and finding whatever way we can to have the courage to be a part of it. Stay in the flow. You'll see, as we always have, the beauty of what God can do. Amen.